I want to start this podcast by saying, if you're a hairdresser, I'm sorry about the title of this podcast. I'm sure you do have great hair. But it's a kind of metaphor about hairdressers not having good hair, and it becomes a bit of a theme in this podcast, and that's why I called this podcast that. So why do hairdressers have bad hair? But not you, if you're a hairdresser. Let's find out with Karl Morris. Hello and welcome to Zestology. I'm Tony Wrighton. Karl, definite friend of the show. He's been on quite a few times. One of Europe's leading performance coaches. He was my coach for quite some years, and I learnt so much from Karl. He's brilliant, actually, in a very understated, down-to-earth way. I always feel very inspired when I talk to him, and I did after this podcast as well. So as I wander along the banks of the River Thames and a very loud plane goes overhead, I'll quickly tell you about Karl. I'll tell you what to expect on this podcast, and then we'll get into it. So Karl Morris is one of Europe's leading performance coaches. He works with a lot of golfers. There's hardly any golf chat in this podcast, so don't let that put you off. But he has just been working with one player who's been in the doldrums for a little bit and kind of got back in touch with Karl. And you'll hear the story at the end of this podcast. They hadn't spoken for a while, then they got back in touch. And I don't think Karl even flew over to the States, but he did it all on FaceTime. 3 weeks later, this golfer won a major tournament. It's really cool, and I'm really happy for Karl when things like that happen as well, because I just think it's very exciting. That's the kind of sports nut in me that gets excited about that kind of thing. But just think that's very cool. So whether it's sport, business or pleasure, the key to success, Karl says, is to go from thought to action. And that's what we're going to help you do in this podcast. Coming up, how to have more good days. The importance of sorting out your home or office or workspace in the right way. Getting rid of books that you haven't read. You know that I did a bit of Marie Kondoing a few months ago, and there's a bit more Marie Kondo in this podcast. Where to move house or where to move home for the best environment. You'll hear a bit more about Karl's breakthrough with that top sportsman, and why do hairdressers have bad hair? But not you, if you're a hairdresser. Here he is, Karl Morris on Zestology.
In any area where you're trying to do well, it's kind of working out what works for you. And some people might perform really quite well when they are sort of hyped up and highly strung or whatever. If you've done that in the past and you've performed well, you should probably keep going along that route. The number one thing when I'm working with anybody in sport is to really try and identify what I call their IPS, their ideal performance state. And
Right.
Everybody is so unique with that. And I think we like to sort of put sort of a cloak around and say this is the answer to everything. But my sort of thought is really drilling down to that individual and finding out what makes them tick. And as a generalization, a lot of people will benefit from calming themselves down and being a little bit more Steve Davis-esque, but not necessarily everybody.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm sure I've told you before, but when I had the screen test at Sky all those years ago, I was just so nervous about it. And I kind of had developed this technique, like a kind of almost like a 20-second self-hypnosis technique that I did in the minute before the screen test started. Right. And it did calm me down quite a bit. And of course, growing up, I was always the one, I wanted to win so badly at sport that I never did.
Going your own way.
When I was practicing at, say, tennis, I'd be fine. And then the moment I started playing a game, I'd be just trying to pat it over the net to make sure it got over the net. That's my type of personality. So it obviously works for me. But you're saying it doesn't work for everybody. And how would you find out someone's IPS?
Well, I think a big thing that I look at is reflection, is the ability that after whatever it is that you do, whether it be golf or business, presentations, tennis, snooker, whatever, is to reflect on your performance and reflect straight away afterwards. I think what most people tend to do is they look in the wrong direction, in the sense that the question tends to be, what am I doing wrong? When somebody's performed badly, they tend to be quite analytical about it and start questioning themselves. Probably the more important question is, what did I do when I was performing well? So I'm really keen on people, after you've performed, be it good, bad, or indifferent, to actually have your journal and reflect on what actually works for you. What are the ingredients of your own particular success? I often say to them, success leaves a trail behind, but we don't look for it. We only, as I said, we only look what's wrong. There was a great story. I mean, it's maybe one of those mythical stories now that's maybe got like the fisherman's tale. But I did hear something that Clive Woodward changed that mentality with England rugby, because the sort of standard thing was when they'd played well and won a game, they'd just celebrate and go out and have a drink and all the rest of it. But when they'd played badly, they'd sit in the dressing room and dissect it to death.
Right.
And he said, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are you dissecting a bad performance when you're highly emotional? Actually, let's calm down and maybe look at it a couple of days later. But he then started to switch it, and when they'd played really well, I believe he got them to just sit there and why have we played so well today? What did we do really well? And actually, that's a great thing to do when you're in that high emotional state of a great win or a great performance.
That's brilliant, isn't it? That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I hope the story's correct, and I heard it from somewhere, but it just makes a lot of sense to me, that, because I remember when I was working in rugby, that went into the club that we worked in. One of the things that the players were always really bothered about, they were even thinking about during a game, the video review, because it was all about what they did wrong. So their actual attention in the game was on avoiding errors rather than sort of just going ahead and being free to make mistakes. So I think the way that you review any performance in any arena is a very interesting. There's a science to that, I think, that we don't look often enough at.
Mm. Yeah, I'm just thinking about applying it to my own life. I'm starting this Amazon business, as you know, and I've been doing it for a while, but it's this kind of new one. And last week was a bit of a disaster, and we had all this stock that went missing, and some of it broke, and I just kind of made a series of rookie mistakes. And then today I've had a great day, and it's all gone really well. And last week I was really kind of not beating myself up about it, but kind of trying to work out what I could learn from it and all that, trying to do all the right things. But today I've been just kind of thinking, that was great, and then moved on. So actually that's quite a good example of
it is. It's so easy to move on when you've done well.
Yeah.
When actually that's the time to really drill down and say, okay, well, what caused that? What was the ingredients of that good day?
Yeah. And do you think, how does that work with yourself? Because I think sometimes that it's quite easy to see these things in other people, and it's a bit harder to kind of do it on yourself, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like the old thing about hairdressers having bad haircuts and physicians heal thyself.
That is brilliant. Yeah.
I think we are. That's why we all need coaching, Tony. I think, because I think that phrase, when you're in the system, you can't see the system, is very apt, isn't it? And I think it doesn't necessarily have to be formal coaching, but I think even if you've got somebody you can just honestly sort of get some neutral feedback from is very useful. I also think stepping out of your own world on a regular basis is a good thing. I know you've done that regularly over the years. I mentioned to you, I've just been in China for a couple of weeks with the Mind Factor, and it was such a culture shock being over there. It's such a very different country, but it was good. It was good because it allowed me to think back. When I get back, there's a few things you need to sort of perhaps look at and pay attention to, that you on a day-to-day basis. Monday rolls into Tuesday, and all of a sudden another week's gone by. So I think stepping out of your everyday world, whenever you, not every week obviously, but when you get a chance to, I think it's a very beneficial thing to do. And I know you've done a lot of it. I think that's why going on courses is such a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
A, because you hopefully learn something, but B, because you just step out of your normal world.
Yeah, helps you to kind of think a bit more about the big picture when you're not just kind of mired in the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
And then what about the coaching aspect? Obviously, I don't want to call you a veteran, Karl, but you've been coaching for a long time.
Experience, I think.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But do you still get coached yourself? Do you still turn to mentors or other people? And so you coached me for a while, didn't you? And I found that so helpful.
Yeah, I do.
Do you still do that yourself?
Yeah, I think that's one of the great. We were talking earlier before we started, and I think that's one of the great things of doing podcasts, isn't it? That you get a chance to speak to other people who've had different experiences. You've been successful in other fields, and I remember the podcast I do, speaking to people like Ellen Langer and,
Yeah.
just really phenomenal people that you can't help but listen to what they have to say and their life experiences. And then you sit and reflect. And John Barge, another guy that came on the show, wrote a great book, Before You Know It, all about the effect of the unconscious and also the effect of your environment. And I just thought he was a phenomenal guest, and it really got me thinking about the triggers around me on a daily basis that we just take for granted because that's your office or that's your living room or whatever. But we don't realize what impact those things are having.
Yeah. That Ellen Langer interview was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. And do you find that sometimes when you do podcasts, it ends up being just a load of questions that you want answered?
Absolutely. And to a great credit, I mean, I managed to get the interview with Ellen Langer, and I likened it to sort of, she for me would be kind of like the Tiger Woods of psychology. It's that equivalence that somebody's held in such high esteem, and she agreed to do it. And to a great credit, I did it for the first time, and I made a balls of the Skype recording, so it didn't record correctly. So I have to ask her to do it again. So it was like the worst, the best, and the worst in a way that I made a mess of the first recording, but she was kind enough to do it again.
I remember you telling me that. That is really nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And who was the other one? John Barge.
John Barge, wrote a book called Before You Know It.
Okay.
I don't know, Harvard, or I think a Yale professor. Really, really nice guy, really interesting man. But it really has got me thinking so much about environment and the triggers within our environment.
Yeah.
And, thinking about teams and the changing rooms and how they're all set up and things like that. And how you go in a lot of changing rooms and, there's motivational stuff on the wall. But actually, after a while, it ceases to have any purpose because people don't even see it.
Yeah.
But actually, you can create different triggers by having the people involve themselves, writing their own stuff maybe and things like that. And just very, very interesting to think of these sort of non-obvious things that trigger our daily behaviour.
Yeah.
And the massive impact of other people. That whole. The old Harvey Penick line, the great golf coach who said to Tom Kite and Ben Crenshaw, make sure you go to dinner with good putters. Which sounds a trite comment, but had genius in it, in the sense that other people have a huge impact on us. We're not even close to being aware of it.
Yeah. Have you been feng shuiing your house then? And
we're about to move in a few weeks' time, so there'll be an enforced feng shui. Just looking at, I've got my library in front of me here, and part of it makes me look really intelligent. All these books there, but part of it's the illusion I've created. But part of it, I just think I need to just clear all this out. And I do like the idea of minimalism. It appeals to me greatly.
Yeah, I did the. Have you heard of Marie Kondo?
Yes, I have. Yes, I've not read her book, but I've heard about this. It's an absolute phenomenon, isn't it?
Well, that'd be an absolutely brilliant one for you to read before your move.
All right.
Because I read it probably 6 months ago, and then she's actually got a Netflix show as well.
I believe.
And the books thing is really interesting. I mean, she's quite controversial on books, but it did mean I threw out so many clothes and all the books. Actually, I kept all the books that I read and like, and there were loads of books I hadn't even read.
Yeah.
So I just got rid of them.
Yeah.
And in terms of minimalism, it's so nice. It's very satisfying afterwards as well.
I sort of instinctively get the idea of being unburdened by getting rid of a lot of your stuff.
Yeah.
And you said about me being a veteran. As I think as I get older, there's a sort of a bit more clarity of how. Maybe it's just me getting past a certain age, but how little stuff actually means.
Yeah.
As a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, you want cars and you want this and you want that, and you just, there's certain things I really still appreciate, but in the main, I see so much more through the idea of having the burden of having to have all this stuff.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And then there's kind of digital clutter as well as physical clutter, isn't there? Mm-hmm. And certainly like financial clutter, the more you take on in terms of financial commitments. And I think you'll really love that Marie Kondo. It definitely, we were in a rented place at the moment. We moved a couple of months ago and then we're moving again. And I said anything that hasn't been unpacked between one move and the second move is definitely out the window for a start. And then I interviewed someone called B. Johnson, who's written this global kind of bestseller called Zero Waste Living, I think. Zero Waste Living. And she's all about recycling, reusing, refusing in the first place. And then quite a bit of composting going on in that as well, which I haven't quite taken that step, but I'm quite keen on that. But you talk about the triggers as well. I mean, that's, in terms of books, if you've got a book that you love on a bookshelf, looking at it or picking it up and reading it will make you feel a certain way, and hopefully it elicits certain kind of response. But if it's a book you've not read, I suppose it might look pretty, but apart from that, there's not really much use to it being there, is there?
You're absolutely right, Tony. We could all, no matter how many books you've read, I'm just looking at this litany of books in front of me now, and you're absolutely right. There's probably 20. If I picked, probably 20 at the most, where if I was really honest, I would read again. But if I saw those 20 on a regular basis, because a really, really good book you keep referring back to time and time and time again, don't you?
Yeah.
Maybe again that reinforces the point that we should do more of that. Actually, keep referring back to the 20 that really matter, as opposed to constantly. I'm a bit of an Amazon bug for books, and I would definitely have a bunch of books in here that I couldn't wait to order on Amazon, but I've never read them. It's very easy to become that sort of bumblebee flitting from one book to another, isn't it? Rather than just just read this one and get this one complete.
And I want to come back to triggers in a second, but do you use Kindle books as well?
No, I did try with Kindle, and if I can't get a book and it's only available on Kindle, I will get it. But I still like to have the physical thing in my hand. I still like to sort of sit in a chair and read, or be on the train or whatever. So I don't know. It's something about looking at a screen and it being on an iPad that doesn't quite do it in the way that it should for me.
There's a brilliant service that I've been using with Kindle, which is when a passage resonates in an actual book, well, I might kind of highlight it or turn the page down or something like that. But with a digital book, you can highlight the passage. Right. And there's a service called Readwise, which will just send you a daily email with 3 of your highlighted passages from all the books you've read. And I've read loads of books on Kindle now, so every day, I mean, once you've read a book, you tend to forget about it, don't you? Yeah. But especially if it's kind of in the non-fiction arena. There's a reason that I highlighted it when I read it. And it's great to have these reminders coming through every day. So that's actually been really brilliant.
I might need to revisit that then.
Yeah, it's reminded me of some of the old books that I enjoyed. And then in terms of the triggers, I'm so fascinated by that. What kind of... I remember when we were doing the NLP training, and one of the basic kind of anchoring triggers, they said, get some stickers and look at a blue sticker and remind yourself of a time you felt motivated or when you're on holiday or whatever, and then put the sticker on the bathroom cabinet. But the thing is, you have to change the sticker around all the time. Otherwise, you just get used to it being there, don't you? So what are the kind of triggers stuff that you've been working on with some of your clients?
Well, I think it's just again getting them. It's not sort of specific NLP triggers like that. It's more a sort of generalized sort of look at. With some businesses, what I've asked them to do is do what I call the beginner's mind walk, and actually take a video camera and walk into the teaching bay or the coaching environment and actually go around with a video camera and look around with the video camera, and then actually watch that back later on, because again, sort of everything is saying something to your customers, everything's saying something to your clients. But we just get used to the walls, we get used to the entrance, and I've had some really interesting results with that, where people say, God, I didn't realise what a shithole it was where I was. Do you know what I mean? But you don't see it because it's there. It's there every day, sort of thing. And I think that sort of view, as though you're looking at it for the very first time, is a great way to do it. And just things like, I remember, hearing years ago about a guy, I can't even remember the guy's name, in the States, who talked about getting people to exercise, and he I think he came up with something like the 30-second exercise program. First of all, a great hook for the brain. Of course, I can do 30 minutes, but he said it was so important that you set up everything from the minute that you got out of bed, that your running shoes were right by the bed, and the kit was ready downstairs, and all of those things. And I find that with my own training as well, that I have to organise everything in a seamless sort of trail, ready to get in the car and go to the gym in the morning, because it's the bed can shout very loudly at you at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning to stay there. But if you've got all these triggers set up, it can make such a difference.
Yeah. My training has definitely suffered since the babies arrived, so I need to put a little bit of that into practice. And then I suppose the kind of mental game coaching 1.0 in terms of working with teams might be to put kind of motivational quotes all over the walls of a dressing room or something like that. Is that something that you kind of wouldn't look at, or you might look at changing it up, or get them? Did you say you might get them to
get them involved?
Yeah,
get them more involved. Where, as I said, the problem is with the motivational, whatever it is that, whether you're, quoting Al Pacino or whatever on any given Sunday. And I think for some people that can mean a lot, or other people, they just switch off to that kind of stuff. So it's kind of throwing stuff at the wall in a way. Whereas if they are involved and I remember with the Giants, with Huddersfield years ago when we worked with them, we had a system whereby just above where they got changed, there was a blank sheet of paper. And everybody was given a pen after the team talk, and one of the questions was, "What are you committed to?" And they would actually write down what they were committed to, and that seemed far more powerful. It seemed to work really well because they had to think about it before they'd written it down, but also it was a commitment to the teammates as well. They'd actually written that they were committed to whatever it was, running harder, tackling stronger, whatever it was. But things like that, I think, are interesting to look at. That, yes, triggers, but are you involved with them themselves so that they don't habituate in the brain? They don't sort of become meaningless.
That's a Cialdini kind of law of commitments, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. In John Barge's book, he talks about the work of a guy called Peter Gollwitzer, who talked about intention implementation, and he said that it's great to have an intention, but you have got to have a mechanism to implement it. And it was very much about things like you might have the intention to exercise when you get home from work, but you need to sort of build in something like, when I get home from work, the first thing I'm going to do is walk upstairs, get my kit bag and go out. So you actually build in the behavior that's linked to the everyday habit of walking in through the door. Because if you don't build those things in, you walk in through the door and the TV's on or the fridge is screaming at you or whatever, and you just go on autopilot. So I think, you've been in this area a long time, so we kind of know a lot of stuff now. We know what's good for us. We know what's healthy. We know that we should be at the gym more. It's actually, I think the next frontier is really drilling down about, how do we get our brains to do what we know we need to do?
Yeah. And environment. I mean, just one more thing on environment. It is interesting, isn't it, that when you walk into a certain place that is designed very nicely, it does make you feel a certain way, doesn't it? Have you been thinking about it in terms of your house move? Obviously, I've got a house move coming up, so I'm interested in that as well. But in terms of making the environment nice, have you been thinking about that as well? Less specifically about motivational quotes or one thing leads to another, but just a lovely, whether it's feng shui or something else, environment.
Set the environment up, and it's interesting that you mentioned before about noise, and noise when you're younger doesn't seem to have much impact. And the place where we live is actually on a main road. When I bought the house years ago, it was a quiet main road. This main road now is like the M6 outside the door, and what shouldn't piss me off really does, and that's one of the things that when we went into the house that we bought, I said to the woman there, I said, can you hear it? And she said, what? And I said, exactly. The silence was deafening. It was just such a good feeling to be in that place where it was quiet.
Yeah, that's so funny. That was exactly one of the things that was most important to us.
Really?
Moving to a street that's not a kind of through street in London, which is quite hard to find. Yeah. And we considered, because obviously you have to find something within your price range in London, and we were looking at a really nice house, but it was on a busy road, and every time we came back to it, we thought, well, we could get double glazing, but no, that's not. Yeah.
And stuff that shouldn't bother you perhaps does after a while, and you can work on that. But also, I think having the choice to do something about it is important as well.
Yeah, but I wonder if. I mean, the other thing I kind of think is when I walk into, I don't know, a mate's kitchen that's particularly nice or a nice bar that's been decorated, I think, oh, this is, I feel a certain way. I feel calm or energetic or, whatever they're trying to get across. But I wonder if, again, after a while, you've got the dream kitchen, but you just get used to it. I don't know if that's the case or not. But.
I think that's one of the things. Funnily enough, I did a podcast, one of my sort of personalised rants that I do from time to time on my podcast, and I did one the other day that had a lot of interest and seemed got some really good feedback, and that was all about gratitude.
Yeah. Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds a bit trite and a bit sort of twee, but I do think. Funnily enough, I go regularly up to a place called Archerfield up in Edinburgh, which is a great golfing location. And Gary Nichol, who's the pro there, we do quite a lot of stuff there. And I often say to him, when you turn into the gates there, it literally is like detaching yourself from the world. It's a beautiful, beautiful environment. And I often say to Gary, who's the pro there, I said, make sure that you never take this for granted. And he said, I don't. He said, on a regular basis, I turn in the drive and I realise how lucky I am to actually work in a place like this. And I think, if you build your dream house and you build your dream kitchen or whatever it is, I think occasionally it's very important to just sort of connect to the gratitude of that and just remember what you have created.
Yeah, that's
and it comes back to the Ellen Langer stuff about being mindful rather than mindless, and just occasionally tuning into what is actually there as opposed to it just being this autopilot response.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and just thinking extremely actually on the environment. I lived for 6 months in a basement flat,
right?
And then afterwards, the place I moved to after that had kind of big windows, kind of glass to ceiling window where you could really kind of get a lot of light in. And I remember. I'm sure that was what influenced that second move, but I did find it quite depressing not having a lot of natural light. Yeah. And then afterwards, always appreciated the natural light. So,
yeah. Well, we need light, don't we? When the system needs to see natural daylight.
Yeah. And in terms of, it's been a while since we've caught up on the podcast. Just wanted to bring it up to date. Am I allowed to talk about the fact you've been working with Graham McDowell? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's public knowledge.
So he's, for people who aren't massive golf fans, he's a golfer who's been right at the top of the game in the past, but has had a slightly lean couple of years. And you started working with him just weeks before he won a big tournament. I'm just really interested to know what happened and whether it was a case of working on something new or reminding him what he did well, kind of thing.
It was very much that, Tony, really. I mean, I've known Graham. We've worked together since 2002, on and off. Far more when he lived over in. I used to regularly go over to Portrush, where he lived. His family are there. But the open is this year. Actually. The opens at Portrush, which will be tremendous.
Yeah.
So it kind of, when he went over to America to live, he got married. And he's got kids and a family, and an awful lot going on in his life, really, in the last 2 or 3 years. Nice stuff going on in his life. He runs a few. He's got restaurants out in the States now that have become very, very successful. And I don't think you directly attribute that his decline in his golf was because he wasn't trying. But I think for any of us, when you've got so many things going on in your life and challenges, and there's so many good young players out there that you only need to be slightly off. And anyway, it was his caddy, actually, Ken, who got in touch with me a few weeks ago and said, would you do some work again with Graham? He's struggling. And he said, yeah, absolutely. So we connected up on FaceTime and started to chat. And it was really a case of, and I find this over and over again, and I didn't really tell him anything he didn't know. Yeah. I just reminded him of some of the things that he used to do really well. And a stupid, crazy little ritual with his putting was something that he always did when he played well. Was the last thing that he did before he actually moved into the ball after he'd done his routine was to fully release his breath. Now, what sounds such a simple thing to do, if you actually drill into the science of that, there's some really quite profound things going on. The idea of you kind of switching from a left brain analytical to a more a right brain creative state of mind. Obviously, there's a relaxation response going on, all of those things. And he said, I used to do that so well. Anyway, that was one of the things that we got him to focus on. And this particular tournament in the Dominican Republic, in the third round, he actually had 20 putts in the whole round, which for any golfers listening is just off the charts. He had 15 single one putts for the first 15 holes. And he told me on 16 and 17, he left the ball right on the edge of the hole as well. So he was very close to having 18 putts. Now, normally if you get 18 putts or 19 putts, it's because you've chipped in 3 or 4 times and you've holed everything else. But it was a pure 20 putts in a round. And
wow.
I think he shot 65 that day. Put him in the lead, and then managed to hold on in the final round. But he said that's all he'd focused on, was just making sure that he connected back. The last thing he did before he moved into the ball was just to release his breath completely. And he said he just felt so good. And he said the images that he was creating in his brain were so rich of the ball going into the hole, which again, as you know, when you're in that sort of more relaxed state, that's a better state to create those visual images.
That's so satisfying for you, isn't it? Do you find, I mean, I'm sure I've asked you this before, but do you find, because obviously that was only a few weeks ago and he won on the PGA Tour. Yeah. Do you find you're watching on the edge of your seat at home? Come on, admit
that was terrible. That was terrible, actually, because it was it was the week of the match play. So it was PGA Tour, but it was a tournament that wasn't being shown live in the UK.
Yeah.
So it was even worse because I couldn't see it. All I was doing was actually checking it on my phone, and I was checking it on my phone hole by hole, starting the back nine, and it was just a bit up and down. I thought I can't keep doing this. There's too much tension involved in this. Then fortunately, Line of Duty was on, and I think it was towards the end of Line of Duty. So Line of Duty kept me occupied for an hour, and by the time Line of Duty had finished, he'd won. So that was that was tremendous.
That's great. But I suppose part of what, it goes back to what we were saying at the start. But part of what you probably work on with a lot of golfers is, it's not just about results, it's doing the process right. And therefore you have to kind of practice what you preach and not check the results every 2 minutes at the same time. So, well, congratulations. That's really cool that he did so well. It was
nice for him, because he was playing on invites. It was potentially his last year of employment if he hadn't turned it around. And by winning, he's got a 2-year exemption on the PGA Tour. So, as he said afterwards, he can play free for a while because he'd started for the first time in his career, starting to play to sort of try and get his card back. He had 15 years of exemptions and things like that, and it's, as we were saying earlier on, it's amazing. You got a guy who won a major only a few years ago, and all of a sudden his future as a top player is in jeopardy because it's such a tough environment. There's so many great young players coming along now.
Well, that is brilliant, and well done. In terms of one book that you'd recommend and one tip for living with more energy and vitality, I've asked you this question before, but I'm going to ask you again. It might be one that you've been reading recently, presumably a paper book on your shelf opposite you at the moment. What are you going to recommend?
I'm going to say, Tony, the book that I mentioned before by John Barge. It came on the podcast because he deserves for it. I know it's sold well anyway, but he deserves for it to more people to know about it. It's such a magnificent piece of work. Before you know it, it's called. I think the subtitle is "The Unconscious Reasons We Do What We Do."
Yeah.
Bargh. John Barge is a brilliant book.
That sounds great. And then what about one tip for living with more energy and vitality? Is it leaving your shoes out before you go to the gym?
You can leave your shoes out before you go to the gym. But I would say ask yourself the question, and I'm getting more and more sort of drilling down into this. It sounds ridiculously simple, but just ask yourself, what does a good day look like? And really sort of drill down into that. And what does a good day look like at the beginning? And what does it look like at the end? And what does it look like? What sort of things are you doing? And that doesn't mean it's all hedonistic, sort of lying around doing nothing. It can be, what does a good day look like? Might be doing the things that are challenging, but getting them out of the way and making the difficult phone calls or whatever. But I think having real clarity on what a good day looks like, with a lot of the players, we've just talked a lot the last few years just about accumulating good days. And it sounds simple, but you've got to be really clear on what a good day is to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Should we, I'm thinking we could call this podcast Why Hairdressers Have Bad Haircuts. But then I'm going to have to put like a little thing at the start saying, look, if you're a hairdresser, sorry about that. I'm sure you've got a good haircut.
We don't really mean it. But somebody you might know who's a hairdresser might have bad hair.
Yeah. Karl, it's so good to talk to you as usual. I feel very inspired. And your podcast is The Brain Booster.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
And I look forward to finding out, to listening to that one with John Barge.
Yeah, that was a few weeks ago.
Where can people find you on your website and so forth?
Yeah, the website is themindfactor.com. If there's any golfers listening, Tony, which I'm sure there are in your audience, we've got a new program out called The Breakthrough, which has been getting good feedback. It's a bunch of videos, an audio program, and an ebook as well. So that's available. You'll see that on the homepage of the website there.
Great. Okay. Well, good to talk to you. Good luck with the house move.
Yes, and you.
Thanks, Karl.
We'll have to compare notes. Yeah. Thanks, Tony.
That's it. Thanks to Karl for coming on Zestology, and thank you for listening as well. I'm still down by the banks of the River Thames here in Strand-on-the-Green in West London. When the tide, well, you've probably heard me record quite a few podcasts down here now, and when the tide goes out, there's just a sludgy beach. I actually recorded a podcast on the beach, the recent Hacks episode. I think that was last week. And when the tide comes in this particular part of London, it always comes over the path, and it actually covers the path. And there are the really posh houses around here are right on the river. And they're beautiful houses. All of them must be worth a few million quid, and some of them are quite old and historic as well. And that's where it's nice to come down here and have a little stroll every day. But when the tide comes in, as it is now, it engorges itself right over the path, and you can't get down there. Right now, I'm stuck on one small bit of the path, and I'm looking at the tide, which has flooded the rest of the path. And what happens when the tide is very high in this part of London is that the locals, the ones with the posh houses down at the front, have to just stand and wait until the tide goes out, or get very high wellies like galoshes and walk through the water. Which strikes me, if you've got a few million quid to spend on a house and then you can't get to it at high tide, that strikes me as a bit of a downer. But they are beautiful houses, and they have got a beautiful view of the Thames once you've splashed through the water as well. So it's high tide at the moment. The tide has flooded the path, and there's no walking down the bit I normally walk down to record this podcast. I'm just in a bit in the corner. It doesn't last very long. It only lasts about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and the tide goes down again. But you'd still be a bit worried about flooding if you live down here. Anyway, that's enough of my environment. Obviously, we spoke about environment quite a bit on this podcast, and that's why I thought I'd describe it to you, because I must admit, being lucky enough to live here, I really love it. Just being able to come down here and have a stroll every day, especially if today I've been kind of working on all sorts of stuff, as you've heard, working on the Amazon business, working on Zestology podcast, and kind of cooped up at home a bit. And just to be able to come down here, either record a podcast or just stroll about. I've even got my shorts and flip-flops on, but just get a bit of nature when you're in the city. I feel exceedingly lucky, and I know how lucky I am. I'm very grateful for it. Well, thanks for listening to Zestology, as always, and my ramblings at the end. If you want 3 zesty things in your inbox every week, you can head to tonywrighton.com, sign up for that. It's all very clear once you get there, and I'll see you next time.